Before Grace met Jacob, her days bled into one another: work, home, sleep, repeat. Her heart had built walls so thick, even she couldn't remember the last time someone truly saw her. Then came that rainy afternoon at the bookstore, the smell of old pages, the soft jazz playing in the background, and the unexpected collision in aisle 7. "Sorry," she said instinctively, bending to help him pick up the novels he'd dropped. Jacob looked up with a crooked smile and a book of poetry in his hands. "You read Neruda?" Grace hesitated. No one had asked her that in years. "I used to. A long time ago." That moment cracked something open inside her. And slowly, something started to thaw inside Grace. She told him things she hadn't told anyone. About her father leaving. About the betrayal that taught her to never trust again. About how she stopped believing in love. Jacob didn't promise to stay. He didn't pretend to have the answers. But he held her hand when she cried. He showed up. Every time. He looked at her, his expression softening in the golden glow. "No," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You just remembered who you are." Grace leaned into his touch, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. The kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep, where joy had once been locked away. It wasn't just about him, it was the way he saw her. As if the cracks in her didn't need to be fixed, only noticed. As if her silence wasn't emptiness but space to breathe. The next morning, Grace woke before the sun. The air was cool, and the world hadn't quite stirred yet. She pulled on her old denim jacket and stepped outside, camera slung across her shoulder. The street was still sleeping, but the light, it was perfect. She snapped a photo of the mist curling over the pavement, the first of many that would fill her new journal. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, though nothing monumental happened. She started smiling at strangers. Her neighbors noticed. She laughed louder in cafes. She wore colors again. One rainy afternoon, she stood by the window, watching drops race down the glass. "Do you ever feel like you've been holding your breath for years?" she asked him. "All the time," he replied, pulling her close. "But it's different now. We're breathing together." And somehow that made all the difference. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of humming. He was in the kitchen, barefoot, pouring her favorite mug, chipped at the rim but cherished. The mug he had quietly taken note of on one of their first nights together. "You're up early," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "I wanted to surprise you," he smiled. "Big day today." She raised an eyebrow. "Big day." He set the mug down in front of her, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "Open it." Inside was a folded piece of paper with 2 train tickets. Destination: the coast. A place she had once told him about, in passing a town with white cliffs and wildflowers where the ocean roared louder than the noise in her head. "You remembered," she whispered, fingertips brushing the edges of the ticket. "Of course I did," he said, watching her carefully. "You said you used to go there when things got too loud. That it made you feel like yourself again." She nodded slowly, eyes stinging with the beginnings of tears. "I didn't think anyone listened that closely." He stepped closer, gently tipping her chin up. "I always listen when it comes to you." Started with a phone call. Jacob had to leave town. His mother was sick, worse than he'd let on. A small town across the country was calling him back, and he didn't know for how long. When he told Grace, he tried to say it gently, but she heard the weight behind his words. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Could be weeks. Could be longer." Something inside her panicked. That old familiar fear. Everyone leaves. She nodded, pulling her arms tight around her. "Okay." But her eyes gave her away. They were already building walls again. Before Jacob left, he took her hands in his. "I don't expect you to wait. I just want you to know that meeting you changed me too. You reminded me what it felt like to be alive." She didn't cry in front of him. She waited until he was gone. Weeks passed. First they talked every day. Then every few days. Then a silence. Grace tried to stay busy. She poured herself into her photography, picking up freelance gigs, taking pictures of strangers with stories etched into their faces. But her nights were hollow. She couldn't live her life waiting. She had to live it choosing. So she started making choices for her. She signed up for a local art show. She reconnected with her sister. She even visited the bookstore again, standing in the same aisle where it all began. And just when she stopped looking for a sign, a letter arrived. The train rolled in just past dusk, its brakes sighing like the end of a long-held breath. The station was quieter than Grace remembered, softened by twilight and the hum of distant crickets. She stood near the platform, fingers tucked into the sleeves of her coat, heart beating steady but loud. Jacob stepped off the last car. He looked the same and completely different. The same eyes, the same quiet steadiness in his presence, but there was something new in the way he carried himself. Taller somehow. Grounded. He saw her, and for a second neither of them moved. And a laugh broke through her, soft, stunned, joyful. And he smiled, the kind of smile that comes when a wish is finally granted. They met halfway. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I wasn't sure you'd write," she answered, eyes shimmering. "I couldn't not," he said. "I thought about 1,000 things I could say, but the truth was simple. I missed you, and I needed to know who I was on my own. But every step still led me back to you." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Instead, she reached up and touched his face, like grounding herself in something real. Then she kissed him. Not out of impulse or longing but of certainty. That night, they walked through the town together, hand in hand, past the bookstore where they used to linger, the cafe that still had the crooked sign, and the old bridge where she once confessed her fears. Everything had changed, and everything was still there. When they reached her apartment, she paused by the door. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. Jacob looked at her, smiled gently. "Only if you want me to." "I do," she said. "But not just for tonight. Not where they left off, but somewhere new." She padded into the kitchen, hair still tousled, one sleeve falling off her shoulder. He looked up from the stove, smiled, and handed her a mug. "Still 2 sugars, right?" he asked. She nodded, took a sip, then leaned against the counter, watching him. "You didn't run," she said softly. "I almost did," he admitted, cracking an egg into the pan. "When I got your letter, I panicked. I wasn't sure I deserved to come back. But I couldn't ignore it. Or you." "I was angry for a while," Grace said. "Not at you. At the silence. At not knowing if the goodbye was forever." "I needed the silence," Jacob said, turning to face her. "Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. And I didn't know how to love you without losing myself." Grace nodded, eyes glassy but unbroken. "And now I know who I am," he said. "And I know that loving you doesn't mean forgetting me." They ate breakfast on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, their knees touching. The morning moved slowly around them, as if time itself wanted to make space for healing. Later, they unpacked the small bag he'd brought, books with worn spines, a notebook filled with journal entries, a folded map with places circled in ink. "Where's this?" Grace asked, pointing to a small red mark on the map. "Somewhere I stood alone and thought, she would have loved this." Jacob chuckled. "I talked to you a lot, actually. You just weren't there to answer." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Well, I'm here now." He nodded. "Yeah. And I think it's not about going back to who we were. It's about growing into who we can be. Together." And Grace, heart full, camera in hand, whispered, "Then let's go find out who that is." She didn't tell anyone he was coming back. Part of her didn't believe it until she saw him. He stood on her doorstep, hair a little longer, eyes a little heavier, holding the same book of Neruda poems from that first day. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she whispered back, her heart thudding in her chest. Neither of them moved. "I didn't come back expecting anything," he said slowly. "But I couldn't stay away. You're in everything now, Grace. In every song, every streetlight, every quiet moment I want to share with someone. She looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, the fear wasn't louder than the love. I was angry when you left, she said. Not because you went, but because you made me believe again. And then I thought I was foolish for it. He stepped closer. You weren't foolish. You were brave. She took a breath. And then another. And then she opened the door wider. Come in, she said. Their reunion wasn't perfect. They had to relearn each other, to understand the new shapes their hearts had taken in the time apart. They fought. They cried. They laughed so hard one night they spilled wine all over the couch and didn't care. Jacob would sometimes wake up and look at her like he still couldn't believe she was real. Grace would run her fingers along the spine of that poetry book and remember the girl who had almost forgotten how to feel. And slowly, beautifully, they built something not based on fantasy or fear but on choice, on truth, on the kind of love that doesn't rescue you, but meets you right where you are, and stays while you rescue yourself. Years later, people would ask them how they met. And they'd smile at each other, thinking about the bookstore, the rain, the distance, the return. But Grace always answered the same way. He didn't just change my life. He reminded me I had one. And every time, Jacob would take her hand, like he did the first time she let him in. Hold still, Miss Grace Jr., Jacob shouted, snapping fake pictures. Inside, Grace sat at her desk in the sunroom, flipping through an old leather-bound photo album. She paused on a black and white picture, a couple dancing in a park with no music, just movement. Her favorite photo. The one that marked the exact moment she started choosing herself again. A soft knock came at the glass door. Jacob stood there, smiling, their daughter clinging to his leg, cheeks pink from the sun. We're being very productive, he said, mock serious. Grace laughed. Clearly. The girl ran to her, throwing tiny arms around her waist. Can we paint after lunch, Mommy? Of course we can, Grace said, lifting her daughter into her lap. Jacob looked around the room at the walls lined with Grace's photos, at the messy paintbrushes, at the worn copy of Neruda still sitting on the shelf and smiled. I still remember that day in the bookstore, he said. I walked in for a coffee table book. I left with a whole future. Grace reached for his hand, their daughter now busy drawing hearts on a scrap of paper. We didn't just change each other, she said softly. We built something no one thought we could. Especially us. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the garden in gold. And for a moment, everything felt like a photograph, still, beautiful, and absolutely full of life.